In today's video, I'm gonna show you how to strengthen worn-out fabric with a visible mending technique called Kantha embroidery. Hi, my name is Matilda and welcome back to Miss Matti, the channel where I show all about DIY, sewing, knitting, mending and generally how to live an awesome and sustainable life. And in today's video, I'm going to show you how I strengthened and did a visible repair on this kimono, dressing gown, cape, whatever you want to call it. It is made of recycled saris and from a brand called Sissel Edelbo. Because it is made from recycled saris, after a while it needed some extra strengthening at the seams and strengthening in some worn out areas. And I got very inspired both by the Japanese borrow technique for this, but then also from Kantha stitching or Kantha embroidery. And Kantha embroidery is a technique that comes from the West Bengal in India, and I think it's been around for over 500 years. I'm not fully sure about the history, but it was started as a technique to recycle and reuse old saris and other pieces of clothing and stitch them together with a running stitch. And because Kantha embroidery is just running stitches, it's the perfect embroidery for beginners. So this is a really simple project. It just takes some time to do all the hand stitching. And throughout the month of April, I'm gonna do all mending videos, and then I'm also working on some exciting content for May. I decided basically that this is gonna be a virus-free zone. I think we all need content that makes us not think about all the stuff that's going on in the world. At least I do. And if you're interested in DIY, sewing, knitting, mending and generally how to live an awesome and sustainable life, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you will not miss the next upcoming video. I believe that will be a denim repair. And without further ado, let's get into the tutorial. To make this visible mend, you will need embroidery floss. I picked turquoise, black and shades of brown. Embroidery scissors, a thimble if you have one. And embroidery needles. Then you will need lightweight fabric. I couldn't find any suitable silks, so I went with a lightweight black cotton. I cut the cotton in different sized patches to cover the worn out areas on the inside of the garment. I made my patches around 1 to 2 inches, that is 2.5 to 5 centimeters, wider than the worn out area, so it can be attached to strong fabric. Once I cut the patches, I folded the edges around 1/4 inch, which is 6 millimeters, and pressed with an iron to create a finished edge. Then I pinned the patches inside the garment onto the worn out areas. Here I found that the care label was in the way, so I decided to remove it with my seam ripper. Now it's time to get started. I decided to do a mixture of turquoise and black running stitches on this little area. Measure out how much embroidery floss you will need by cutting an arm length worth, then separate the strands. I used 3 strands on my project. Thread a needle with your embroidery floss, tie a knot at the end. Start at one end of the patch and bring the needle in between the patch and the garment to hide the knot. I found it helpful to stitch from the wrong side first to fasten the patch close to the edge, but you can also mark the edge on the right side of the fabric. Make running stitches by weaving the needle up and down through the fabric. You can create up to 3 to 5 running stitches at the same time before pulling the needle through completely before making the next stitch. Continue to create straight running stitches from one side to the other of the patch. If it helps, you can mark straight lines with tailor's chalk. I decided to live risky and just eyeball it. Before continuing, I decided to attach all the patches on one side with running stitches. I did this to reduce all the pins in the garment to make it easier to work with. To create a distinct wavy and wrinkled look of many Kantha stitched pieces, I stitched the stitch under the fabric shorter than the one above. And here I'm stitching in turquoise embroidery floss and hopefully be able to see a bit more clearly what I'm doing. In Kantha stitching you can either do steeped running stitches, which means that stitches are placed on top of each other, or you can do like I do and make aligned ones where you have the stitch in the next row and the previous row's gap. Or at least I'm trying to do this. Sometimes it ends up being both steeped and aligned stitches in this project. And this is how the first finished part of my repair looks like. And just a little thing to bear in mind, if you do make closer and tighter stitches like I have done here, you will create a stiffer fabric compared to if you make looser and longer stitches, which will create a softer fabric. And that is just something to bear in mind. As I struggle to keep my patch flat without pins sticking in my poor hands or getting caught in other parts of the garment, I decided to stitch on the wrong side on the outer edge of the patch to keep it in place before turning the work and work from the right side again. Now I'm gonna strengthen the other side around the seam, and I decided to make one half in black and the other half in turquoise. What I love with Kantha stitching is that my uneven stitching is part of the look. As you can see here, my seam is torn, and I will try to strengthen it by folding a bit of fabric over the torn seam and pin in place. Then I will stitch over the seam to keep it in place. I found a single straight stitch was easier to use than several running stitches at this point. Then I use the same method to strengthen the seams at the top of my sleeves by pinning fabric from the garment over the torn seam and covering the back with a patch. And this is how my shoulders turned out. I also needed to strengthen the middle part of my belt. To create a more even look, I decided to hand stitch the two pieces together. I folded one side of the seam over the other and pinned in place. And then I whipped stitched in place with normal sewing thread on both sides. And now I will pin a piece of brown bias binding in place, which I stitched together at the back of the belt with a whip stitch. Then I used one strand of this slightly thicker caramel colored embroidery thread. I fastened by tying a knot which I pulled inside the bias binding. Then I started to create running stitches vertically along the bias binding. I decided also to do running stitches in the brown area that still was showing through, as I thought that would make a more complete look. And this is how it turned out. I discovered that some smaller areas were a bit worn out too, so I decided to strengthen them with fusible interfacing. Eventually I plan to have Kantha stitches all over this piece, but first I will have to find a beautiful printed silk as my lining fabric. It turned out that one of the areas I attached fusible interfacing to needed extra strengthening after all, so I did a couple of rows of running stitches back and forth. And this is how it finally turned out. I really hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if you did and you want to get into more mending, do not forget to check out my Mend with Matti playlist. I will link that up in the cards as well as in the description down below. And if you do any of these mends, do not forget to tag me on Instagram at Miss Matti and use the hashtag #MendWithMatti. And if you like this video and you found this tutorial helpful, do not forget to hit that like button. And until next time, hej då!